to do a few preliminary things before we get into the hearing. And I haven't heard anybody about bill introductions, but at this time, if anybody has spoken to the reviser and has something, I would entertain any bill introductions. Not seeing anybody in here. Are you seeing anybody online? Nope. All right. We are going to be meeting tomorrow. So you'll have another opportunity tomorrow, but let me know if that's something you're working on. We have 3 sets of minutes, and they've been emailed out to you. And I'm sure you've all diligently reviewed those minutes. The chair, if there are no changes or additions, the chair would entertain a motion to approve all 3 sets of minutes. Looking for my vice chair making a motion to approve all 3 minutes. And your second? Okay, we have a second. So discussion on the minutes, I think they're pretty straightforward. And Deborah is great at keeping me in line, and she does great minutes. But if you catch anything, I'll be shocked. But you know, I hear her laughing, I think. So, okay, with that, let's vote on the motion. All those of approving the minutes signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Hey, we're rolling now. Okay. Let's get into our hearing. I'm going to open the hearing on House Bill 2039. And I want to let Nick start us off, as he always does, with a brief introduction. So, Nick, the floor is yours.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, and thank you. Again, this is Nick Myers with the Revisor's Office, and I hope everybody can hear me okay. Committee, House Bill 2039 amends current law regarding required instruction in schools. So in current law, in 723217, that law requires all accredited schools, both public and private, to provide a course of instruction, one suitable to the elementary grades in civil government, United States history, patriotism, and the duties of a citizen. This law also requires all accredited high schools to provide a course of instruction concerning the government and the Constitution of the United States. And this high school course is required for graduation from high school. So what this bill would do, House Bill 2039, is it would require each student enrolled in an accredited high school beginning in the 9th grade to pass an exam on the principles of American civics. Such exam would be required to consist of 100 questions that are similar to the United States Citizenship and Naturalization test, and this test would be required to graduate from high school. This bill would authorize any student beginning in the 7th grade to start taking this examination as many times as necessary to obtain a passing score. The bill would also provide that a student who has an IEP, that IEP may take precedence over this requirement. So certain students may not be subject to this test requirement. The bill would also authorize the State Board of Education to adopt rules and regulations to implement the provisions of this bill. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Questions committee. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, does the bill define the definition of passing grade?
Certainly, that's a great question. And I should have mentioned, no, the bill does not provide a passing grade. And on page 2 of the bill language itself, within the rules and regulations that the state board would be authorized to adopt, one of the things the bill notes is that the state board may establish a passing score for this examination in those rules and regulations.
And I can add, that was my intent. I don't want to micromanage, but I do want to work, even if we need to fine tune rules and regs, but to have them have that provision to do this. This bill is updating the statute that already requires the class. And so that's a good question. And again, a part of a lot of things how we handle through rules and regs. Further questions of Nick? Seeing none. Hey, I'm going to, the agenda showed us doing proponents first, but I want to let the opponents go first, so make sure that they have time to give their testimony. And then we'll get into proponents. We have two listed that are going to be speaking to us today. And we're going to start with Leah Flitter with the School Board Association. Leah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see the members of the committee that I know from last year. This is my first time in front of the committee this year. And also pleased to meet the veteran returning members of the committee and also the new members of the committee. I look forward to interacting with you more as the session goes on. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today as an opponent of this bill, and I wanted to note, you probably see on my testimony that the United School Administrators of Kansas are joining us on this testimony. You have my testimony in front of you, so I won't read it, but I just thought I would summarize our remarks by saying that while this bill is well-intentioned and we applaud the chair on his goal of improving and increasing civic engagement and civic education, KASB and USA Kansas believe that it duplicates the existing and the future planned efforts of the State Board of Education and the 286 Kansas public school districts. And as a result, we believe that the civics test envisioned in this bill is unnecessary. But we look forward to working with the state legislature and the State Department of Education to help make the chairman's goal of civic engagement and civic education a reality. Thanks, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you for that. We're going to move to Mark DeSetti before we get into questions. So if you could hold your questions till he is done. Welcome, Mark DeSetti.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. But where did my friend Representative Hubert go? I can't see being here in my basement. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, I represent Kansas NEA, and we too, along with our friends at KASB and United School Administrators, stand in opposition to this bill. We wonder why we're singling out high school kids for this with a high stakes test on civics. Our kids have been taking and studying the Constitution and civics and American government. There's a required course for graduation from high school. If they don't pass that course, during which there are many assessments given by their instructors, they don't pass that course, they don't graduate from high school until they take it over again and pass it. So we already have this in there. I don't doubt that we've all watched Jimmy Kimmel interview people on the streets who can't answer simple questions. Of course, he might interview 50 more before he finds the one he wants to air. But clearly we were alarmed as all when insurrectionists invaded our Capitol, calling for Mike Pence to be hung. It would seem that maybe some people don't understand civics and the Constitution and transition of power and how elections are run in this country. So maybe it is important that people learn it, but our kids are learning it. Our high school kids are getting this in the American government class that is required for graduation from high school, during which there are multiple assessments on various topics of government and civics within that. We would also remind the committee that Article 6 of the Constitution leaves general supervision of our system of education to the State Board of Education. We fundamentally believe that this is an issue for the State Board of Education, not for the legislature. We do believe the legislature can pass resolutions, can call upon the State Board to study something and look at it, And we think you're perfectly within your rights to do that. But we fundamentally believe issues of curriculum and assessments should be left to the State Board of Education, who has general oversight of the system of education in the state. With that, we think this bill is entirely unnecessary, and we would ask the committee just not to pass it. And I would stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now is the appropriate time. You also do have additional opponent written testimony, I think. But Representative Samsel, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about the delay there. I love the tie, by the way. If anything, we've learned in reference to Mr. DeSetti's reference to the nation's capital, we've learned that our words and our actions matter. So I'm going to do my best to keep those in line with something that's productive. But I mean, I spend a lot of time in our classrooms. I ref basketball. I'm around our kids a lot. So to suggest, and I know this isn't what Mr. DeSetti was getting at, but to hear that this type of education, and maybe it's just the test is more likely what he was referring to, but it's entirely unnecessary, is difficult for me to listen to, because a lot of our high school kids right now are not getting this. They don't understand how our civics work, but that's obviously not just a problem with our students. That maybe is much more widespread problem. My question first, and I have two, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, but the first one is, and if I missed it, please let me know, but I haven't seen a fiscal note associated with this bill. Has that been provided?
I will ask Nick. I do remember seeing, and I've spoken with the state board, that it's $10 per test, and I think there was around $400,000 note if it was done in that formal way. Yes, I just now see somebody sharing that 400,000 number is a part of the fiscal note.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I honestly have some concern with the cost, but then again, the goal here is education. And I compare this not to always bring in my sports world, but as referees, we have to take tests and pass it, and that has some cost associated with it. But also we get the best results when that is done in a team effort with the ultimate goal of being education. Some are veterans and some are new to it. But my question for the proponents then, and I'm just spitballing here, but they've got opposition to this thing. I think there's a lot of good things to this bill, notwithstanding some of my concerns. But if we were to include some type of measure in this, because I believe it's incumbent on us as elected officials of the state to be involved with our kids and our future generation, if there were some requirement associated with this bill, that state legislators, perhaps it's senators, perhaps it's representatives, perhaps somebody else, but if there was some requirement that they spend a day in the classroom with the students going over the 100 questions or something similar of that nation, would that lessen your opposition to this bill?
Well, gosh, Representative, I think that's certainly a long goal, a great idea. And somebody like you, I know you're very comfortable in the classroom. I would encourage those of you who are comfortable doing that to contact your local school district and inquire about doing that. I think our opposition really springs more from the fact that our kids are already taking courses on the Constitution, U.S. government, U.S. history. They're already required to take a test and to pass a semester class, and I think they get 3 semesters of history and government throughout their high school career that's required in order to graduate. So we just feel like it's just one more test that the kids would have to take. They're already being assessed, it's already being measured. And as we move away from seat time and standardized tests and more toward the State Board of Education's goal of civic engagement and encouraging greater student success through civic engagement and community participation, we don't see what the benefit of yet another test would be towards that more holistic goal of encouraging students to work as poll workers, to volunteer in their community, and to become a better citizen and become more knowledgeable of our civic and democratic processes in that manner, rather than just, take another test.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one more, but I'll defer to the committee if time permits. If not, I'll save it.
Okay.
Thank you.
We can always come back to you.
The chairman,
Representative Estes.
may I also
Oh.
respond to that question?
Yes, you may.
I would just point out it would be delightful to have legislators come into classrooms. Every government teacher in the state would welcome a legislator in to talk about the process and how things work and civics. No, I can't imagine a teacher saying no to some legislator who wants to come in and do that. So I'd say do it. The other side of that is, however, our teachers are the ones who are steeped, and our government teachers are steeped in the history, government, and social studies standards that have been promulgated by the State Board of Education for the education of kids in government. They're the ones that study those standards, understand those standards, build those standards into their instruction and their assessments. The problem with this test is it's simply redundant. There's absolutely no need for it. It's not going to prove anything that the assessments given currently based on the standards adopted by our State Board of Education aren't doing.
Representative Whitmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, and I'm not sure who can answer it. Maybe one of our people providing testimony today. So my question is, has the State Board have the proponents of this work with the State Board of Education or any of these other groups in regard to this issue? I mean, I'm certainly not a teacher, and so I usually listen to my state board or other education groups, and I wonder what their involvement has been with this proposal.
And I can speak to that. This is, again, a bill that was heard last year, and I had numerous opportunities last year to work with them. I'm currently working with them and having discussions. They're sharing information with me. I am going over to the state board next week, not just on this issue, but this is going to be one of my primary topics. And then I have a meeting tentatively set up for next Thursday for more ongoing discussions. It is my desire to work closely with them. My frustration is that even from last year to this year, some things have happened, decisions were made that the legislature wasn't kept in the loop in, and so that's part of what I'm following up on now and getting more information on. But we are closely trying to have a partnership to look at this issue and other issues.
Okay, I will appreciate hearing more about that as it develops.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I will be sharing more too, and I believe we'll have more opportunities for that to happen. Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for any of the proponents. When I read the bill, I went and I looked at the longitudinal performance reports on this Kansas State Board of Education's website. And the highest grade level that's tested is 8th grade. And I was very concerned in the category of history and government that 4.93 of the students tested were a level 4, which is our highest level, and that means that they have an excellent ability to use the knowledge. 40.19 were a level 3, and that means they can use the information effectively. So together, that's 45.12% of the kids can use the information well. The converse of that is that 54.86% of the students could not use that information well. They had limited ability and basic ability. And are you aware of this? And this is why I feel that the bill is justified. Do you have knowledge I don't have, or what can you tell me?
I can't speak to that longitudinal data, Representative. I'm uncertain 8th grade level because, kids in high school, which would be 9, 10, 11, 12, are also required to take those classes and to pass the test to graduate. So there should be some data in there about high school students. I might throw it over to Mr. Giuseppe in case he has
I can
more
actually
information.
speak to that a little bit. It's information I have just recently gotten. And 6th, 8th, and 11th grade, The test was given the last time in 2018. It's been every 2 years. But one of the things that I recently found out was that the test has been discontinued by the state board. And that's getting a little bit into my proponent testimony, but I'll share more about that. But the information shared by Representative Estes is pretty in line with what I was given by the state board. So I'll speak more to that in my proponent testimony. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this question is for our NEA rep, but I'll take any answer. Background, my degree program at Kansas State required cumulative tests like this that ignored all grades we received. Prior in that subject, we had one test to pass in order to student teach or graduate in that program. So I think we've found in education in general, when we have a big test like this, we enter into a teach to the test mode. And have we found that mode of teaching to be successful in expanding our kids' critical thinking skills that we're asking them to expand over and over?
Well, I think you pointed out something that's absolutely correct. We had this experience under No Child Left Behind, and it was legislators pointing this out repeatedly, that there is a great tendency when you put in place a high stakes test to teach to that test at the expense of other areas. So for example, we know that during No Child Left Behind, where the focus was on only math and only language arts, that social sciences, other sciences, the arts were really shorted during that time period. And we'd like to think we've come out of that period at this point and are more focused on a broad education. So yes, there is a tendency. Look, if the issue is the only thing you have to pass is the citizenship test, then nothing else is all that important. So make that the final exam for the government class and teach to the test. The child gets the credit and and passes the test. That doesn't mean that student got a solid grounding in the functions of government and how government works and what is civic responsibility and so on and so forth. So I would agree that there is a tendency when you create a high stakes test to teach to the test and give short shrift to the rest of the standards.
All right, I'm going to go to one more question from Representative Stogstill, and then we'll move on to proponents. Representative Stogstill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sadly, our society seems to be very fractured in their support of or definition of civics in this country right now. And my question is, who or what organization would be putting together this test? Would it be a statewide test? Would it be a national test? Would each district come up with their own test? How would that test be developed and administered?
I can speak to that. That's a part of why we have the rules and regs, and my intent is to work with the state board to allow those kind of decisions to be made by them. This test is a test that, again, is out there. We have a copy in our testimony to look at the 120 questions that are out there, but we have a lot of flexibility as far as, and I have a teacher that's going to be sharing here in a few minutes about how practically hands-on he's using this test right now in a learning opportunity because these questions are already a part of state standards. So in a few minutes, we'll get into more of an explanation from a government teacher on how that works.
Mr. Chair, just one quick follow-up. Would that test developed by board, would that be mandatory, or would school districts be able to modify that in any way?
I am very flexible on how the state board works to put the rules and regs and defers to local control on how those decisions get made.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that's already in the bill. I'm going to go ahead and move on. If we need to come back to more questions for the opponents, we can do that. I have somebody that's going to be sharing when I give my testimony that I wanted to get to too, because he had a 2:30 meeting. But with that, I'm going to take off my chairmanship hat and hand that to my vice chairman and just share a few thoughts, seeing how this is my bill, and I'm passionate about it. My passion is not by rote memorization of facts. It's not about being a proponent for over-testing our kids. It's about having kids learn the basic facts, the facts that we want all citizens know, those that become citizens from outside of our country, to have that knowledge. And I think, you know, in part of my testimony, I have quite a few handouts, but the results that Representative Estes was sharing, you know, they're in line with a lot of the information nationally. 1 in 4 students can name the 3 branches of government. Just 1 in 3 can pass an easy citizenship test for immigrants. 24% can pass proficiently on the NAEP scores. And the NAEP scores are kind of our, as far as nationally, you know, with math and reading and even in civics government are one of our gold standard tests, 24%. We have a challenge before us. I've spoken with a lot of classes in my 30 years as both a school board member, as a tutor, as a 20-year plus veteran of working on education issues. And again, I have 2 constituents, Matt Klusner, who's going to share his thoughts here in a second, who is a government teacher to 2 of my children. And then I also, and I'm going to cut to him real quick because I know he has to leave, Carl Mann is a constituent, a friend of mine, who is, was born in South Africa and went through the process of becoming a citizen. And I just, in talking with him, asked him if he could just share a few thoughts. And as a part of my testimony, Carl, if you're on the line right now, I just wanted to let you just share your thoughts as far as a non-citizen taking this test and the role it played in you even becoming a citizen of our great country.
Right. Thank you. As the chairman said, my name is Carl Mann. I'm a lawyer. Can you all hear me all right?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. I'm a lawyer and a proud naturalized citizen of the United States. I think it's in that capacity that Mr. Hubert has asked me to come and talk today. And for that, I'd like to thank Representative Hubert and the members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to be heard. This is a subject that is close to my heart, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I think we can all agree that the level of education about our Constitution, our history, and our civic institutions is shockingly poor in many segments of our society, and that making improvements in this area and stressing the importance of civics would be good for our country and our state, and that ensuring that our young people, as they move into adulthood, have a uniform and minimal standard of understanding and experience with that is going to be important. The measure that you're considering here represents just a small step in that direction, and I'd like to applaud both Mr. Hubert and the committee for giving this important issue the consideration it deserves, regardless of what the decision is. I think working towards strengthening our understanding of civics and the importance of civics is going to serve the country and the state well. As someone who has taken the naturalization test and helped others prepare for it, I've come to believe that it represents a bare minimum amount of knowledge that a citizen of this country should have about our history and our civic institutions. Any high school student who has paid even passing attention to their required civics courses or has simply lived in our society and been marginally aware of the current events that are going on around them should have no difficulty passing such a test. I am sensitive to the comments made by the opponents that this may seem like it's a pointless endeavor or a redundant endeavor, but I think anything that will help to prepare our young people to fully enter into the civic society or civil society is important and not too much to ask. This test would ensure that each graduate has a uniform and unified basic understanding of our civic institutions. The state legislature has recognized the importance of civic education for our young people and entrusted our education system to make sure that they are so educated. Requiring that high school students pass a civics test like the one required of new citizens is not only good for our society as a whole, but it also represents a common sense way to determine whether our educational system is properly discharging the minimum required of that statutory obligation. But more importantly than that, it's a measure that can help strengthen and unite our state and our country. I've had the opportunity to give the keynote address at several naturalization ceremonies here in Wichita, including that at which my father was naturalized and that at which I was naturalized. When talking to those who are poised to take on the rights and duties of new citizenship, I have sought to highlight how exceptional and unique the United States is among the nations of the world. Most nations are bound together by a common language, common culture, and common geographic borders. However, the United States is different. We are a nation made up of people who come from different backgrounds, different cultures, and different geographical areas, and whose families speak or have spoken many different languages. What binds us together is not merely a language, culture, and borders, but an allegiance to a constitutional system of government and to the ideas, philosophy, and history which created that system. In this sense, civic education represents the very glue that holds us together as a nation. We cannot stress the importance of that enough, and doing so by requiring an additional test in order to graduate from high school is not asking too much.
Thank you,
As
Carl.
it has been noted by the opponents, or at least one of the opponents, we're in a time of great division in our country, a time in which our disunity is nearing an existential proportion. It's imperative that we take all possible steps to reinforce the bonds of nationhood and fortify the unity that comes from patriotism. Strengthening our common understanding of our history and the ideas which lie at the foundation of our nation is essential to doing that. The passage of HB 2039 represents a small and baby step in that direction, and I would urge you to vote this bill out of committee for the consideration by the House. As I said, regardless of what the outcome is, I think it's important work that we consider how can we strengthen civic education in the state and stress the importance of the unity that comes from having a common understanding of our history and our constitutional system. I thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you. I am happy to take questions if anyone has any, but if not, I'll go ahead and mute and listen for as long as I can before I have to leave for my 2:30 meeting.
All right. I appreciate it, Carl. We're going to keep moving, but I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and share today. I also, again, mentioned Matt Klusner. He's a good friend of mine. I knocked on his door 21 years ago. He's a former Shocker baseball pitcher. And again, he's been a government teacher in Valley Center for some time and has some unique perspectives that I thought would be pertinent to our discussion today. So Matt, thank you again for joining us. And the floor is yours, Matt, just to share your thoughts on how this is practically being done right now and how maybe this bill might be incorporated into what you're doing in the classroom right now.
All right. I want to thank Representative Hubert for the invitation to share my thoughts with you today. I did teach children and am humbled by this opportunity. I have been a public school teacher for 26 years, and I've always done my best to teach my students the values and infinite wisdom that our founding fathers and framers of the Constitution provided for us in the establishment of our federal form of government. I have used the citizenship test in my government and civics classes for many years. I believe that there should be restrictions and limitations on some of our students from being required to pass this test. Those students with IEPs and SPED services should never be under that requirement. I could support this test, and I would support this test for our other students, being that the test is at the same requirement level as our naturalized citizens. Here are some of my reasons. If we, the people, don't know what our rights are, then we have a good chance to lose them. This is a common belief in by many of our most distinguished leaders and politicians. Ignorance leads to manipulation, while knowledge leads to independence and freedom. There's a movement today to stray away from what our founders created in order to manipulate politics and take power away from the states and federal system, a move toward more power for political parties. James Madison warned us in Federalist 10 against what he called factions or political parties. He defined them this way: a number of citizens who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interest of community. Factions or political parties can be dangerous if proper restraints are not in place or are removed from our constitutional structure. Our students must be taught accurately what the framers of the Constitution created and its purposes. The Madisonian model of government allows parties to exist without the annihilation of our liberty, or more specifically, our freedom of speech. This is done through a safeguard of intricate yet rigid system of checks, balances, and separation of powers. In order to remove the threat of faction or political parties from our constitutional system, Madison explained two remedies. One, destroy liberty and not allow political parties to exist. This would produce an authoritarian regime. This remedy is worse than the problem. The second is to freely establish only one way of thought. Well, this is impossible if we are left at liberty to form our own opinions. The free marketplace of ideas is what has made America unique and special on this earth. And that is what we public educators should strive to do. Teach our students the what and the why of our constitutional system and not engage in partisan indoctrination. I will close with this. Teachers do have some discretion on what and how curriculum is taught in the classroom. And just like James Madison did for us, I believe it is our duty to put in place safeguards to protect and maintain our school classroom to be free from bias and the dangers of political partisanship. This simple nonpartisan citizenship test could do just that. It could ensure that our teachers teach and our students learn the fundamentals in which our government was created by the Constitution to guarantee diversity of thought and equal participation in our government in order for future generations to continue to live with the blessings of liberty. I appreciate the time you've given me, and I could answer some questions.
I'm going to hold questions, but I do greatly appreciate the work you've done with my children and other children in Valley Center. Matt has brought in hundreds of kids to the Capitol, and I've had great interaction with them over the years. And I appreciate all your hard work teaching government and history in our schools for the last 20 years, 26 years. And if I misspoke, he was a baseball pitcher. And I might have said basketball, I don't know. Darren Miller is my basketball friend. But Matt was a great pitcher for the Shockers. So I'm going to keep moving just real quickly. You know, last year, I spoke very passionately on this issue. I also had a great civics teacher who fired my passion up. He got me hooked up with Boise State, and I got elected to be a state representative in 1976. And it was a great learning experience for me. So much so, at that point in time in my life, I decided someday I was going to do it for real because I got so excited about it. And lo and behold, when I was 40 years old, the opportunity presented itself, and you know, here we are 21 years later. That's why I'm passionate about this. What I'm not passionate about is just a test. But I will make this point. When we're teaching mathematics and we want our children to advance in algebra, trigonometry, calculus, all those different things, there are some basic facts and things they need to learn to be successful. Your multiplication table, it's crucial. You don't get good at algebra or trigonometry or anything else if you don't know your multiplication table. So there's some simple facts that children learn at a young age, and they're basics. And that's what this test is, basic information that provides the foundation for them to do the other things that we want them to be doing, being engaged and involved. I will give the state board credit in that they are trying to round out the experience and get more civic engagement and having what I would consider a task or a project-based way of showing that they are putting into practice what we want them to do, and then demonstrating their knowledge of the facts that are a part of even this test. But what I'm suggesting is they can work hand in hand. The test is testing of the basics that we all want our kids to know. Then that is applied in a way that the state board is expanding their test. Again, I mentioned earlier that their every 2-year test has been dropped, and that caught me off guard, but I still believe that even as we move away from No Child Left Behind and some of the excessive testing, there is a need for some. And that's my ongoing effort to continue to work with the state board, even to figure out the best way to use this citizenship test in alliance with what the state board has already done with their redesign of standards last year. So I'm planning on having numerous follow-ups with them in this week and next week, and we'll continue that. And as I do that, I believe we can find common ground and work together. The point I make even in people defining that the legislature defers to the state board in these areas, this issue is already in statute. I'm not doing any breaking new ground here. I'm taking a statute and updating it in a way that I believe it makes it better, more understandable, and accomplishes the goal that we as legislators want when we are making the provisions to fund our schools. And in this small area, it's a very effective way to partner with both the hands-on and with this type of written test. I'm going to try to wrap up real quickly because Attorney General Schmidt is on the phone, or on the meeting also. But I'm just going to end real quickly. I'm passionate about this. I've met a lot of kids who are passionate about it too, you know, but unfortunately there's a lot that aren't. And taking this test is a way, first of all, to motivate them to learn the basics that they need to learn, just like you need to know your multiplication tables. If you're not passionate about civic engagement and making sure you vote and all those different things, you at least need to know some basics. And this class would make sure that it would address what I spoke in my very comments about the problems that we have that are shown on the NAEP test and all the different other ways we look at it, and even the state assessments that took place in 2016 and 2018. With that, I'm going to wrap up my proponent testimony and hand my comments over to the Attorney General. I was listed as in the Kansas City Star article as a lone wolf. Derek Schmidt is a friend of mine that I served with in this building for many years. He is also a lone wolf in these efforts, and I'll let him share his thoughts. But we have formed a wolf pack, and I am reaching out to all of you to join our wolf pack and help me to support this bill and to move it forward. And so as a part of our wolf pack, and as one of the co-founders, Attorney General Schmidt will now have the floor to share his thoughts. Thank you, Attorney General Schmidt, for joining us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's the first time I've been called part of a wolf pack, and I welcome the designation, and I'm glad to walk with you in this advocacy, and you know, we'll make our case, and folks will decide, because that's how our system of government works, which of course we all understand. And the whole point of this exercise is we want to be sure every citizen understands that, not only those who are naturalized, but those who are native born. You have my written testimony, which for those of you who were serving last year in this committee, it looks remarkably similar to last year. We just updated it a bit. I certainly won't read it. And I recognize a lot has already been said in this hearing. So let me just, I've jotted a few points. Let me sort of mention a few things that either I think may add some additional value, or if they don't, at least I want to reemphasize, and then I won't take too much of the committee's time. First, I want to associate myself with Mr. Klusner's and Mr. Maughan's comments. I've not met Mr. Klusner before. I have met Mr. Maughan before, and I thought they both did an excellent job of summarizing why this matters. It's not just a school management issue, and it's not just an education or a public education issue. It is a being an American citizen issue. It's a fabric of this society issue. It's a how we govern ourselves in a very diverse setting where people have remarkably different ideas and we have to all agree to play by the same rules if we want to get along. Because that's the unique idea of America that does, as Mr. Mon said, distinguish us from many, many other nations, and I would suggest perhaps every other nation on the face of the planet. But if we're all going to play by the same rules, we have to have at least a common starting point of agreement and understanding on what those rules are. We can debate what the next step is, what the rules should be, how they might apply. Many of us on this call have made a career of it, and certainly as a society, we do that all the time, but we have to have a common starting point of knowledge. That's what ties us together. It's the keystone. And, we can debate what that starting point of knowledge ought to be, but I don't think we have to, because we're not the first people to go down this road. The federal government made a decision many, many years ago that for those people who were not native-born U.S. citizens, whether you're born in Canada or Myanmar or Tanzania, you choose to become an American, there are certain things you must do. And one of those things you must do is pass this test, or a test very much like this. I recognize there's a bit more flexibility in this bill. It's a precondition. And all of these arguments that we've had in this discussion in terms of, well, it's just a test, or there are better ways to convey knowledge and information, that's all true. But it's also true in the context of naturalizing a person to join our American family. And yet we made the decision as a country many, many years ago that one of those steps is to pass this test to ensure some common starting point of understanding for discussion of the rules that we all agree to live by. And it just seems to me very sensible to say we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Take that common point that's already required of naturalized citizens and apply it to those of us who are privileged to be native born and get to avoid all of that but for some type of action like this. So I think that's point number one. Point number two, it was mentioned earlier, I think it was Representative Samsel, but wouldn't it be good if legislators and perhaps other government officials, I don't want to put words in his mouth, spent more time in the classroom? And I smiled when I heard that said, because I certainly am one who believes the answer to that is yes, and I might very briefly share with you a bit of history. When I served in the Kansas Senate, I spent 6 years as the majority leader, and one of the tasks we took on, not because anybody told us we had to, but because I thought it was important, and so we chose to. There used to be, I don't know if it still exists, but there used to be a program run by NCSL called America's Legislators Back to School. It was very much a voluntary thing that encouraged legislators all over the country, starting in August and running through the fall semester usually, to reach out to their local schools, public or private, particularly to government or civics instructors, and to try to arrange to come in and talk with kids, just to give kids a chance to see this is a person who's actually living democracy, for lack of a better term. I got a t-shirt that says that. That's why I choose the phrase. Make those connections. We decided on our watch, we thought that was important. And we worked with all of my colleagues, 39 others, Republicans and Democrats. And out of the majority leader's office, we actually organized that effort every single year. We would contact your school districts and any willing senator's district. We would set up and do the scheduling. We do all the hard work to make it happen. All you had to do as a member was show up at the appropriate time and say, here I am, and you meet the teacher and you go forth and have a good discussion with the kids. And I think it was a very good thing. I think we ought to do more of that. And I certainly don't think that this proposal is a substitute for that type of flesh and blood, real life engagement. But perhaps it's a motivation to folks in your positions now, my position now, many, many other forms of public service to do that. And I think that's a positive. One other thing I might mention is it was asked earlier if the state board had taken a look at this. And Mr. Chairman, you gave the recent history on that. And of course, that's what really matters, because today is what matters in terms of decision making on this. But as I think you know, Mr. Chairman, I did, before you and I made common cause on this, before I knew of your interest or you knew of mine, 6 years ago now, I took a very similar proposal to what's now in the bill before you to the state board. I went over in 2015. They were kind enough to have me at one of their meetings. We had a very good discussion in an open session about why I thought at that time it would make sense to have as a simple starting point requirement that every kid coming out of school has to pass the civics test, naturalization test, just like any person elsewhere who wants to become a U.S. citizen must. And I didn't persuade him to require it, but we did have an excellent discussion on civics education, and I view today as just a continuation of that. And I really want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, and the others on the committee for considering this. And I'll close with a comment similar to what Mr. Mon said. I hope you'll do this. I hope you'll do many other things as well to promote civic engagement and civics education. Whatever you do or don't do, I think just having these discussions is really very valuable to remind us all that, you know, there are some sort of common basics that we all have to agree to in order to live together in this great country. And this is as good a starting point as any. So thanks so much for letting me just share those thoughts. And I wish the committee well in your deliberations.
Honored to have you join us. I have one more testimony, and before we get to questions, and Nick, let's just a second, Reinecker, we have your written testimony. If you could just briefly, you know, not read your testimony, but just share your thoughts so that we have time to get into some questions, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. My name is Nick Reinecker from Inman, Kansas. Usually bring my two children up here, but they are at school at this time learning some things. I believe you do have my testimony. I think that there is a difference between knowing your rights and exerting them. And, you know, as a parent, I have a responsibility of teaching my children certain things. However, I've heard that it takes about 6 times to remember something. And so I do feel that this is an appropriate thing to do, to be reminded of what you know, civics is all about. And going through, I printed out the 100-question test for the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. And one of the questions really struck me. It was number 53. What is one promise you make when you become a United States citizen? And any of these answers would be sufficient. Give up loyalty to other countries. Defend the Constitution and laws of the United States. Obey the laws of the United States. Serve in the U.S. military. Serve the nation if needed. And be loyal to the United States. And I have to say that going through that, I struggled with a couple questions myself. And so I think the repetitive nature of these basic foundational principles is good, whether they hear from parents, the school, faith leaders, friends, or anything else. And I'm certain I could find a test to take out to make this one happen, as I have went through Common Core with my children and having my wife on the local school board. Passing a test does not mean that you know it and you remember it. You have a snapshot of that moment in time that you know that knowledge. So, you know, I appreciate everybody here has said exactly what I feel, and so I don't want to belabor the point or waste any of the committee's time, but I absolutely do support this bill, and it's good to be here. So thank you for your time. I'll stand any questions.
Okay, before we get into questions real briefly, I do want to just make sure we acknowledge that the opponent testimony included from Nathan McAllister, Brent Yeager, and from the State Board with Dina Horst and Ben Jones. And then I had a proponent testimony that got sent to my phone but didn't get sent to my assistant. And so I have to apologize for that, but out of respect to Excellence in Education, which is a Jeb Bush's foundation that looks at trying to reform and improve education, they also sent proponent testimony. Let's get into questions now from the committee. And go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is very basic. I'm a little confused on this point. At the high school level, grades 9, 10, 11, or 12, is a test like this currently required?
Matt Klusner, are you still on the phone or on the call?
Here. No, there is not a test like this required right now. You know, we test them on these concepts in our other unit tests, and but we don't have a required graduation test at this time.
It is a part of state standards, and it is used in the classroom. And my goal, even with what Matt and other government teachers are doing, would be a part of what they're already doing, to be able to incorporate this type of a test into their classroom activities and be able to pass this test at any point in time in a student's civics government class or at other times as appropriate.
But did I understand, or perhaps I misunderstood, that it used to be that this was administered in the 11th grade and that is now being ignored, or is that?
No, the state board had a biennial test on history and civics that was given every 2 years. The last time it was given was 2018, but it's been discontinued at this point in time.
So why was it discontinued?
That's something I'm looking into further and having further discussions on how that happened and how they moved to their task-based types of assessment. But it's another reason why I feel like my bill is necessary to help fill the gap of that test being ended.
Well, would the opponents have any insight onto why that might have been removed?
I don't know if the opponents are still on. Okay, if you have any comments, I'd appreciate it, but if not, I promise you this, we will get more answers on that and provide that back to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, this is Leah from the KASB. I don't want to work for the state board, but I wonder if the question around the assessment is just the assessments weren't given last year because of the pandemic. So, that could even be part of it. I'm just not clear on that, but I didn't know if that was there's been a little bit of a gap, I think, as far as the pandemic and.
Okay, and I can't tell you that the decision even, I think, had been made. There was a pilot program being initiated last year that got shut down because of the pandemic, but the actual implementation of the test had already been decided not to be used.
Oh, okay.
Representative Collins, did you have a question or a comment? Hand him the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, for letting me use your microphone. This question is for anybody. I remember when I was in high school, the government, civics, that sort of thing was required, and you've mentioned that also that's required. And I do kind of want to do a little shout out to my government teacher, because I still talk to him from time to time, and he was really good with me about my interest that's led to me running for this position. And even though he does not belong to the same party that I do, I think he's still somewhat proud of me for running. But anyway, I was just asking, is the requirement now in school, is it a semester class? Is it a year-long class? I was just wondering about that. How much of that type of thing are students required to take nowadays?
I think Matt could probably answer that as well as anybody. Matt, could you respond?
Yeah, right now it's a semester class is what's required. And, it takes some getting through some information, to do that in a semester, but we get it done, and the students do a good job. And here, we really do focus on the constitutional aspects, but we do get into this, the federal and state cooperation, definitely. But it is just a semester requirement right now.
Okay. Well, thank you for what you do for the students, and that goes for everyone else involved in education who is here and wherever you are on WebEx. Thank you.
Hey, Matt, you teach both a regular and an advanced placement, don't you? Don't you have an advanced placement civics class?
Yeah, I have taught both. Our regular government class is taught by another teacher right now. I teach the dual credit college credit government class, so they get high school and college credit through WSU Tech. But we coordinate really closely together, both teachers with the regular ed and, my students. But I do have some students that just take it as the regular high school class. They don't take it for the dual credit. So it works for both.
I'm glad we can do both. Representative Sample, you had a quick question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one for the Attorney General, if I may, and then one for the chairman actually wearing his non-chairman hat. It probably makes more sense to start with you, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. Because the one thing that I have gained from you, and I greatly appreciate, is you seem to have a willingness to work together and compromise to get something good here. But I feel like we're maybe talking past each other a little bit when I hear one of the opponents mention a redundancy. I'm not hearing that there maybe is a redundancy, but please enlighten me. I would like to know that before I vote. But it seems like, yes, some of these things are being taught, but I don't know that there's actually a test, and maybe that test should just be part of any government grade. Do you get an A, B, C, or class versus you have to pass this specific test. So I'm interested to know what redundancy, if any, is really there. But my heartburn with this thing is, can this not already be done? I suspect these questions are not rocket science. So when I'm asked to take $10 in taxpayer money from my constituents back home to spend that per test per person, is there not already a way to use the money that's already going to our schools to accomplish maybe the same thing, if you will?
I am in agreement with you, and that's my ongoing effort to work to find that type of a compromise, even with the state board, that could be put into place through rules and regs. And so we're on the same page in that area. And again, I believe what's already happening in the classroom and the ability to do it in a way that it's just a part of the flow and you wouldn't have to have that $10 test is very doable.
Awesome. If I may, for the Attorney General, if he's still on the line, I know he's got a million things to do.
I think he is. Go ahead.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being with us here today. My question is, and you mentioned, I believe you said it was America's Legislators Back to School. And this gets to a little bit of my heartburn if it's $10 per test. And then actually one of the previous representatives, who's getting that money? It doesn't really matter to this committee probably, but I will say that I, and perhaps many others on this committee does as well, but it strikes me if I even had $5 per student and incorporated pizza or some other food somehow, that these kids may learn a lot more than what may come from a test. And I don't mean to suggest that the test is not important, and maybe we should do that. But are you aware of some program or is there a legislative program, or does the state of Kansas in some other way? I mean, I don't know that we need to encourage legislators, but it seems like if there was some pot of money there, maybe it's already money that's in the school's budget. I mean, I know for our interns here, we give them like a $5 voucher in order to buy them lunch for the day, but to kind of maybe facilitate, encourage our legislators, not because they wouldn't already do it of their goodwill, but it just seems like anytime you got a free meal around the Capitol, a lot more legislators show up. I didn't know if there was a way to incentivize that type of stuff with the students, if you will. And again, I don't mean to minimize that maybe we still need the test, but if I think a lot of us are saying our overall goal is to improve civic knowledge and education, so that if and when we give them that test, they'll ace it, instead of some of them that maybe aren't quite as intrigued by some of these issues.
Right. Well, Representative, I'm not entirely sure what to say. I'm certainly not an expert on using pizza literally or metaphorically to incent civic learning, but I think if I understand your broader point, you all got to decide where you're going to put your money. I was a little puzzled when I saw the fiscal note on this. I mean, I'm not an expert in delivering education services, but I have watched my kids, who, like a lot of your kids, been learning remotely now for almost a year. And, they've done an awful lot of click-through online tests. I'm not quite sure why that costs $10, but that's a debate for somebody sort of other than me. But I think to the extent the point is, is there a way to better coordinate civic learning? Because obviously not every kid learns the same. What's going to work for some in terms of reaching them is not going to work for others. Different schools are going to have different approaches. I'm all for all of that. And it's just kind of back to my earlier point, and I understand you're not saying it needs to be an either or. does seem to me to make some sense to say all those efforts are fantastic. We ought to do them. But there ought to be some common starting point. And that's back to my advocacy why I think the test makes some sense. But I have no disagreement with your point.
All right.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, could that test be done as part of graduation requirements without, it sounds like maybe using an outside vendor, maybe more along the lines of an ACT or something where we're paying people out of state using taxpayer dollars versus paying somebody within the school walls or somebody in Kansas to administer the same thing, if you will?
Yeah, Representative, again, I'm of all the people who are participating here, I am certainly not the expert on the mechanics of how one administers examinations to kids in a school setting. I was surprised at the fiscal note. I just don't see why it has to cost a whole bunch of money to have kids, click through a fairly simple test. But so I would think the answer is yes, but I would suggest you direct that to somebody who actually their profession is delivering education services.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I can say even I know that Matt Klusner is doing this type of testing in his class right now without paying $10. Again, the test is available. You can pull it out. You can test your kids on it. You don't have to spend any money, and there's ways to do it without making the more formal test that I'm very flexible in working out the guidelines on how we would do that through rules and regs. So Representative Wolfmore, and then Representative Donahoe, and then Representative Hoskin. I appreciate the dialogue we're having.
I believe you called on me.
Yes. Yes.
I don't have a question.
Okay. Sorry. But it's good to see your
That's
face.
okay.
Representative Donahoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you can hear me with this. We're kind of engaged now in a civic exercise because one of the things that we routinely hear when we're running for office is compromise. Why don't you guys go up there and compromise on something? So my question to the NEA representative is, what compromise have you offered with regard to accommodating the chairman on this bill?
I've suggested, Mr. Chairman, that he do exactly what he's been talking about. Engage with the state board, pass a resolution directing the state board to examine this, to examine the assessments that are given in civics classes. There's really what I'm hearing throughout this is the chairman saying, well, I'm going to engage, I'm engaging with them, we're in talks, we're doing this. That's exactly what the chairman should be doing, working with the state board. It's in the state board's purview to handle assessments and to handle curriculum issues. I just want to add one other thing is that when you look at, can this test just have teachers give it in their class? Not if it's a high stakes test. A high stakes test has to be standardized and it has to be scored independently, because if you're going to deny a student graduation from high school on this one test, then you have to standardize it. I mean, Matt can give this test and he may very well give this test now. That's just fine. But if it's a high stakes decision that says you don't graduate because of this test, you passed every other test in Matt's class, you've done all of this just perfectly, but you failed this test, that's a problem for a school district, I would think, when they start getting in there and each teacher's giving their own test. It's got to be standardized and scored independently, and that's a problem with that. Basically, I mean, we don't have a problem exploring this. We don't have a problem with giving this test in class. Making it a high stakes test is a problem, and taking this authority away from the State Board of Education is a problem, which is why in my testimony I said, pass a resolution, direct the state board, work to examine it, talk to the state board. It's their responsibility.
So my question was, what compromise are you willing to make? And I really didn't hear anything. Maybe the exception being that you're willing to give the test, as long as it's not a high stakes test. Do I understand that as a compromise? Because I tell you what it'll tell us. What it'll tell us is the level of the students' understanding of civic matters. And we may be able to go above and beyond some basic things, this or that. It will really give us, you know, a true understanding. So is that your compromise, that you're willing to give that so we can ascertain that?
Here's what I believe. Again, I think anyone can give this test. Any school board could say, we're going to give this test in our classes. Any local curriculum group could say that. The state could say, the State Board of Education could recommend this as the state to give. We have no problem with any of that. The biggest problem is with this being a high stakes test that has the potential to take away from other things that are being taught in class, from the other activities that they're doing. Because here's the thing, if all I need to do is take this test, if that's what keeps my kids from graduating, that's what I'm going to focus on. Now, I don't believe most teachers would absolutely do that, but there's a tendency to move in that direction, especially when you're getting pressure to make sure we got to have 100% pass this test. There's pressure to do that. So I think the compromise is this: continue to work with the State Board of Education, express your legislative desire to the State Board of Education, and charge them with examining this issue and finding the best way to assure that our students have the knowledge and skills you want them to have, and examine whether it's appropriately covered in the standards that the state board uses. The compromise is direct the state board to examine this. Chairman Hubert should continue what he's doing in his conversations with state board members. We see that the state board
NEA
is
will advocate for that.
I appreciate the dialogue, and I have a few more questions. It's already getting close to, you know, 2:45. So Representative Poskin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the opponents, and it's a follow-up to Representative Estes' questions. She talked about engaging with information at level 4 and level 3. My question is a multiple choice exam engagement at level 3 or level 4, just getting question correct or incorrect? And I asked my question being much more familiar with the AP tests, because I'm a college admissions advisor, where you can get a 2 on that test by answering a lot of multiple questions correctly, but having a 3 or a 4 or 5 is engaging with the information. And it seems like the point is to have our students engage and experience and have the knowledge to move forward and engage at a higher level, perhaps than a multiple choice test. Thoughts?
Since you're asking the opponents, I would say I think you're correct. This is that not seeing the test, and I don't have it in front of me. Whenever you do a test that is a multiple choice test, it limits you. It takes you away from higher level thinking skills. It does not assess higher level thinking skills. So yes, you're correct in doing that. Now, would this tell you, did you understand the basics of the Constitution, the 3 branches of government, and those kinds of things? A multiple choice test couldn't do that just fine. If you're looking at higher level thinking skills, though, obviously a multiple choice test is not as good. That's why teachers, if you read some of the testimony, for example, from Nate McAllister, who submitted testimony, it's really about the engagement of the students and moving them in their projects and in their service things and so on that helps them learn this. And I think Matt would be best suited to talk about how they get those kids to the higher level thinking skills. A multiple choice test generally keeps you on a lower level of rote memorization.
And I'm going to keep moving because we have a few more questions, but I definitely want higher level thinking skills, but I also want to take the fundamental steps of just getting this knowledge in kids' heads so that helps them to move on to the critical thinking skills. Representative Burkamp, I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question would be for the opponents. I agree that I think if you have a test, that teachers are probably going to teach to the test, but at the same time, I think it's important that we send our kids out of high school with some basic level of civic knowledge, because my question to you would be, is voting a high stakes exercise? And then what do you think makes an informed voter? Do they need to have some sort of basic knowledge of how government works to be an informed voter? Thank you.
I think
Representative, if I may, I would say that, I think the history and government teachers across the state are working very hard to impart that knowledge. I think particularly in election years like this, you do see a lot of kids who become more interested in voting. I think we saw an uptick in 18-year-olds who registered to vote and who got out to vote. I was searching for the Kansas statistics on that, wasn't able to find it. I think voting is a very high stakes exercise, but it's not the same as a test that we would require kids to take. I think as the State Board of Education and the leadership there, they traveled around the state a few years ago asking businessmen, asking community leaders, asking the men and women who are the lifeblood of this state, what do you need from public education? And they did, none of those folks said to them, we need kids who can answer questions on a civics test, whether it's standardized or not. They said, we need kids who are willing to be involved in their communities, who have those higher level thinking skills, who have some knowledge and some experience of the real world, so that when they get to post-secondary, when they get to business, they are that better fledged, that full-fledged citizen, that more holistic person. So I felt like I needed to contribute that, and then I will defer to Mr. DeSetti, who has the classroom teaching experience.
I would say that voting should be a higher level thinking skill. I can vote straight D or straight R without thinking. Voting should be, you should go through a higher level thinking process and analyzing what candidates are saying, what they stand for, how they match your own philosophy and beliefs. It should be a higher level thinking skill. I would hope that for everybody that I see on this screen, it has been a higher level thinking skill. It's not enough to just say, well, you need to vote. Well, what do? Well, you need to vote after you've listened, after you've analyzed, after you've asked questions, after you've found the candidate. It is a higher level thinking skill, absolutely.
Representative DeSetti, I want to call you representative because I feel like right now you're a part of the committee, but we are in agreement on that. And so for us to say we're in agreement on that, let's cherish the moment.
I want to make sure it's listed in the comment in the captions down there, so it can be
there
seen.
You go. Representative Stogstill, and then I'll get back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I can share some of the same concern that the Attorney General did. I was rather shocked about the fiscal note attached to this, and that $400,000, would that go to, is that what that would cost the state school board to develop that test, or would we be spending that money buying tests from an outside organization? And I don't know, maybe that $400,000 might be better spent in allowing the state school board to improve overall government curriculum throughout all of our schools. I'm just wondering where that money, where it's going.
We will get more answers for you on that question, and again, get more information about the fiscal note that was provided. Representative Poskin, I know I skipped over you, and I'm circling back to you, and I apologize.
No problem. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. You will need to take that hat off, though, because this is a question for you. In the surveys that are mentioned, first of all, there's an improvement. We don't know what accounted for that improvement in the Annenberg survey. And I'm assuming that the sample is not representative of high school students in Kansas. Do we have any data about how they would do, say, just on the 100-question citizenship test across the state, to see if this is really an issue? Because maybe it's not that group after they've taken history and
one of the things that I've talked to research about, and one of the handouts that's provided, is 20 other states have taken this step. And so I've asked for additional information in regards to other states. And I think if I can get feedback from them, that would be probably the best way to answer that question, because it's very applicable as far as what other states are doing and how it's working in other states, and how we could best maximize it is if we use it here in Kansas. So I'm going to ask Deborah, who is my brains and my partner in this effort, to make a note to follow up with Jessa. And I think Jessa's on the meeting. Help me to remember to follow up with other states on trying to answer that question.
Thank you so much. That's perfect.
Further questions? It's about 10 till 3, but this has been a very profitable meeting, and I appreciate everyone's patience and willingness to indulge your chairman on something I'm very passionate about. So I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to look to Adam. Do you see anybody else? Representative Schreiber, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is for Matt. Apologize for not, I can't really see your last name, so, but Klusner, I'm sorry. When you give the test in your, the naturalization test in your class, I was just doing some looking online, and it's a 128 question test, but only 20 questions are asked, and they're asked verbally. Is that how you give the test in the class, in your classes?
No, I've done both printing off, the test and doing paper and pencil. But also, you can get an online version where, the website just gives the 20 questions and the kids can take it right there. That's not how we would want to do a high stakes test, but, they can take it right there and I'm monitoring it, and, it's not a high stakes test. I just want to see how they do. They're interested on seeing how they can do on it. I do it more like a pre-test, at the beginning of the semester, and then we do, kind of in the middle of the 9 weeks, or about 9 weeks, kind of see where they're at with some of that, and then just kind of with post-test data, So, my kids do really well with it. There are some questions that are a little harder than others, but it's pretty basic, and really my concern is just kind of keeping that baseline of information, make sure people are still getting that and putting it into their classes, and then using it to develop those higher level thinking skills activities.
Matt, I also I'm very appreciative of you taking the time. I know you're using this as a learning opportunity for your class, even in your civic engagement with participating in this hearing. So I look forward to hearing your feedback. And I know that the podcast that I did with the 98.1, you're using that also. So I would love feedback on that. So thank you again for your efforts. And I will give you a call this weekend, and we can talk some more on what you see as the positives of participating in this hearing. Representative Donahoe, one more follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your negotiation with school board and everything, have they given you anything? Have they acquiesced to anything, any of your requests, or is it just, we're not going to do it?
They're providing data, and I'm at a point right now, I'm going to the state board on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, I've asked for outside of the state board meeting, they finish up their meetings, and we're going to sit down and try to find compromise. That's my goal. So, and again, even with the high stakes test and how this bill is worded, I want the end game. I'm flexible. How do we get there? I believe there is a path forward. And working with my fellow Wolfpack members on this committee, we can get it done. I'm confident in that. And I believe that even in the challenges I've faced in the past, I am committed to doing what it takes to scratch this off my bucket list of things that I would like to see done. And I believe that the state board would be, and Randy Watson would be glad for me to do that too, so they don't have to hear about it from me. So I'm, maybe that's if I pester enough and I push enough, and they'll say, well, let's just deal with him so that we can move on. Further questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Digress a little bit there. Representative Samsel and, Sanders.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this would be directed at the Attorney General if he's still with us. Would it be possible for a local school board to require this kind of a test, even if it wasn't required at the state level?
Representative, I'll, give the quick disclaimer I always give that before I give you a formal legal opinion, I want to do the research, but I sure would think so.
All right, Representative Samsel, I think you had one more follow-up too.
Thank you. Yes, very brief.
Minds that are thinking of good questions.
Very briefly for Mr. DeSetti, and not to put him on the spot, but if he has something that would be a proposed resolution that thinks this committee should pass to the Kansas State Board of Education, I would love to see it. I don't know that I'm a member of the chairman's wolf pack yet, but I'm trying to keep an open mind. So that would be helpful to figure out. Hopefully we're all on the same team in wolf pack at some point. So if Mr. DeSetti could share that with me or the committee, that would be helpful.
Representative, I would suggest, I don't have one because I didn't sit down and write one, but I know the revisers have written this type of resolution before for various things that you've directed the state board, whether it was original ones around dyslexia or any number of things. I would think that you could talk to your revisers about ones that have been done in the past that might be models for this.
And I can guarantee you that Nick and I have and will continue, and I would hope to, if his time would allow, for him to be a part of the discussions I have, because he is very good at helping to make those types of proposals based on his work in other areas. So Nick, I know you're still on the line, and I know you will be able to help me to work with the state board to find the right wording.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to sound like I'm barking at anybody, but we've all spent a great deal of time here, including from our proponent testimony and our opponent testimony. I'm hopeful that KNEA or the Association of School Boards or somebody would have time to help us come up with a resolution that could be considered and perhaps could be passed if we don't change Kansas state law. But it seems if we don't have KNEA or those groups or opponents right now at the table helping us draft that, then we're back here at square one debating it rather than having something that's perhaps to the representative from Johnson County's point, a good compromise that moves the ball forward for all of us. So that would be my closing comments. And thank you to Mr. DeSetti and to the chairman.
I'm willing to those types of suggestions, text them to me, email them to me, and I will make sure they're a part of the discussion as we move forward. Thank you, committee. It's almost 3 o'clock. You've been very patient. You've let the chairman speak way too much. And appreciate your willingness to allow me to work on something again that I'm passionate about. We are going to be meeting tomorrow, and I want to be very clear about tomorrow. It is not a hearing. We're not accepting testimony. It's an update on what's been going on in education budget. Several of you on this committee are on education budget. We are having further discussions today on that issue. There's a lot of good handouts and information, and I wanted you just to be aware, have the information so you can see what's going on in that area, ask questions, but that's all it is. It's informational. It's no more than me trying to help educate you as new members on things that are going on in education budget that I think you will enjoy seeing and asking questions about. So that's on the agenda for tomorrow. And again, we had a couple bills from last week that I think will be able to work, and that's on the counter too as far as action on previous bills heard. With that, committee, thank you again, and we are adjourned.